What?
I'm your boss. I said I'm your boss, Mr. Calloway.
You? My blacks? Are you high? Get your ass out of that chair right now!
Sir, my name is...
I don't give a damn about your name. You crawled up to the wrong floor, Black Secretary. Go back to whatever hole you came from.
I was invited.
Nobody invited you anywhere. Move before security drags you out. Oh.
She knelt down, picked up every page quietly. No tears, no anger. Just steady hands collecting what was hers. Then she sat back down.
What would you do if the person you just humiliated turned out to be the one who could end your entire career with a single sentence?
That woman's name is Grace Irwin, 26 years old, born and raised in West Baltimore. If you saw her that morning, kneeling on marble, picking up scattered papers while a man in a $3,000 suit laughed, you'd think she was nobody. You'd be wrong. Grace grew up in a 2-bedroom apartment on North Avenue, the kind of block where police sirens were background noise and the corner store had bulletproof glass. Her mother, Denise, worked 2 jobs, days at a hospital laundry facility, nights cleaning offices in downtown Baltimore, offices with mahogany desks, leather chairs, and framed diplomas. Grace would go with her sometimes, 7, 8, 9 years old, sitting under those desks doing homework while her mother vacuumed around her. The smell of lemon disinfectant, the hum of fluorescent lights, the sound of her mother humming gospel while wiping conference tables that cost more than their rent. One night, Grace looked up from her math worksheet. "Mama, will I ever sit at one of these desks?" Her mother stopped wiping, looked at her daughter. "Baby, one day you're going to own the desk." Grace never forgot that. Her grandmother, Ruth Irwin, made it real. Ruth cleaned offices in Manhattan from 1962 to 1998. 36 years of mopping floors, scrubbing toilets, being invisible. She saved every spare dollar. When Grace got accepted to Wharton on a full scholarship, Ruth handed her a small leather Bible. Inside the cover, handwritten, "To Gracie, from Grandma Ruth, 1998. Remember the people they don't see." Ruth passed 3 months later. Grace carried that Bible to every exam, every interview, every boardroom she ever walked into, including this one. After Wharton, Grace joined Belmont Partners as a junior analyst. Within 18 months, she was directing their failing analytics division, a unit that had bled $40 million in 2 years. Nobody wanted the job. Grace took it. 24 months later, that division generated $120 million in annual revenue. She didn't do it by firing people. She did it by listening. The janitors who knew which floors had empty offices. The IT staff who knew which systems bled money. The assistants who knew which executives actually worked and which ones just showed up. She listened to the people nobody else talked to. They told her everything. That reputation reached the board of Orion Dynamics, a $4 billion industrial AI firm on Park Avenue. For 22 years, Orion had been run by one man, Harold Calloway, the founder, the face, the ego. Behind the magazine covers, Orion was rotting. 3 straight quarters of missed earnings, a harassment lawsuit the board paid $8 million to settle, 2 HR complaints buried, 1 whistleblower pushed out, turnover at 34% and climbing. The board had seen enough. 6 weeks before that Tuesday, they voted unanimously to replace Calloway. Someone with no ties to the old culture. Someone who could rebuild. They chose Grace. But here's what matters. Chairman Philip Morton called Grace the night before. "Don't announce yourself. No badge, no title. Walk in like a stranger. Watch how the building treats you." Grace asked why. Because the only way to know what you're inheriting is to see it without the mask on. If they treat a stranger well, you've got something to build on. If they don't, you'll know what needs to burn. That Tuesday, Grace woke at 5:45 a.m. at the Lexington Hotel. Black coffee. Q3 reports, one last time. She held her grandmother's Bible, thumb across the cracked leather, the faded gold lettering. Then she walked into Orion Dynamics at 7:48 a.m. No badge, no name tag. Just a young black woman in a navy blazer carrying a leather folder. The receptionist, Ashley, looked her up and down. "Are you from the cleaning service?" "I'm here for the 9 a.m. meeting." Ashley didn't believe her, but she waved her through. At 8:31 a.m., Grace sat down at the boardroom table, opened her folder, waited. At 8:34 a.m., Harold Calloway walked in, and the worst morning of his life began. Let me take you back to that boardroom. 8:34 a.m. The door swung open hard enough to rattle the water glasses on the table. Harold Calloway walked in the way he'd walked into every room for 22 years. Like he owned it. Because he did. Or at least, he thought he did. Italian leather shoes on marble. The click, click, click echoing off the floor-to-ceiling windows. A charcoal suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Gold cufflinks catching the morning light. A Rolex that he made sure everyone noticed every time he reached for his coffee. He didn't see Grace at first. He went straight to the side table. Poured himself a cup of black coffee from the silver carafe. The steam curled up past his face. He took a sip. Checked his phone. Scrolled through 2 emails without reading either one. Then he turned around, and he saw her. A young black woman, sitting near the head of the table, in his boardroom, on his floor, in his building. He stared. Not the way you look at a person, the way you look at something that doesn't belong, like a stain on a white shirt, like a scratch on a new car. His jaw tightened. His nostrils flared slightly. The coffee cup froze halfway to his mouth. His eyes moved slowly, deliberately. From her braids pulled into a low bun, to her navy blazer, to her leather folder open on the table with her initials embossed on the corner. To the chair she was sitting in, the chair 1 seat away from his throne at the head of the table. He set his coffee down on the marble surface, hard enough for it to splash over the rim and pool around the base of the cup. "Who let you up here?" Grace looked up, calm, steady. Her hands didn't move from the table. "Good morning, sir. I'm here for the 9 a.m. I didn't ask what you're here for. I asked who let you up here, because somebody downstairs made a very stupid mistake this morning. The receptionist directed me to this room." Calloway laughed. Short, sharp. The kind of laugh that isn't really a laugh. It's a weapon disguised as amusement. The receptionist. Right. I'm going to have a long conversation with Ashley about what happens when she lets strays wander onto the executive floor. Strays. He called her a stray. Like a dog that slipped through an open gate. Grace didn't flinch. She closed her folder slowly, placed her hands flat on the table. "My name is Grace Irwin. I was asked to be here for this meeting." He walked toward her, each step deliberate. His shoes clicked against the marble like a countdown. He stopped 3 feet away, looked down at her the way a man looks at something stuck to the bottom of his shoe. "Grace Irwin, never heard of you, and I know every single name that matters in this industry. So either you're lying about being invited, or somebody is playing a very expensive joke on me that I am not finding funny." He leaned in, close enough that she could smell the bitter coffee on his breath, close enough that she could see the tiny vein pulsing on his left temple, close enough that his shadow fell across her hands on the table. "Let me make this very simple for you, sweetheart. I built this company. 22 years. From nothing. Every brick, every contract, every dollar that flows through this building. Mine. And you think you can just walk in here, sit in my boardroom, open your little folder, and pretend you have a seat at my table?" Grace said nothing. She just looked at him. Steady. Unblinking. Her breathing didn't change. Her posture didn't shift. She sat the way a person sits when they've already decided exactly how this ends. That silence made him angrier than anything she could have said. "Oh, the silent treatment. That's cute. Real cute. You think that's going to work on me? I fired people who actually belong here for less than this. People who earn their seats. People who didn't just crawl in off the street wearing a blazer they probably bought yesterday." He reached across the table, grabbed her leather folder, the one with her initials embossed in gold. the one containing her Q3 profitability analysis, her 90-day restructuring plan, her handwritten notes from 3 weeks of preparation, and a board resolution with her name printed in bold that he would never bother to read. He flipped it open, glanced at the first page, snorted.
What is this garbage? Quarterly profitability analysis, prepared by G. Irwin, Belmont Partners? Belmont Partners? Something flickered behind his eyes, a tiny spark of recognition. Belmont Partners. He knew that name. Of course he did. They'd been all over the financial press for that impossible turnaround. Some young hotshot director had taken a hemorrhaging division and turned it into their top performer in under 2 years. For half a second, just half a second, something in his brain tried to connect the dots. G. Irwin, Belmont, the 9 a.m. meeting, the board's unusual silence, the emails he'd been ignoring for 6 weeks because he assumed they were routine paperwork. But 22 years of being the smartest, loudest, most powerful person in every room he'd ever walked into wouldn't allow that thought to finish forming. His ego grabbed it by the throat and choked it dead before it could save him. Belmont Partners. Sure, sweetheart. And I'm the CEO of NASA. He ripped the first page out of the folder. Slowly, deliberately, maintaining eye contact the entire time, like he wanted her to feel every fiber of paper tearing apart. Then he crumpled it into a ball, held it up so she could see, and tossed it into the trash can behind her chair. That's where this belongs. That's where opinions from people like you always belong. In the trash. He wasn't done. He grabbed the rest of the folder, held it up high above the table, and threw it. Papers exploded across the marble surface like confetti at a funeral. Quarterly reports, revenue projections, supply chain analyses, her handwritten notes. The ones she'd spent 3 weeks preparing at her kitchen table in New York. The ones with her grandmother's favorite saying written carefully in the margin. Remember the people they don't see. One page floated down slowly and landed at his feet. The board resolution. Her name in bold. CEO appointment. Effective immediately upon transition. He stepped on it, ground his heel into it. Didn't even glance down. Pick that up. Every single page. On your hands and knees if you have to. And then get out of my building. Before I call security and have them drag you through the lobby in front of every person on every floor between here and the sidewalk. Grace looked at the papers scattered everywhere. She looked at the crumpled page in the trash can. She looked at the board resolution under his Italian leather shoe, her own name disappearing beneath his heel. Then she stood up. She didn't yell. She didn't cry. She didn't argue. She didn't reach for her phone. She knelt down. On the cold marble floor of a $4 billion company's executive boardroom, in her tailored navy blazer, with her dead grandmother's Bible still in her bag, Grace Irwin knelt down and began picking up her papers. One by one, page by page, slowly, carefully, like each page was worth something to her, even if it meant nothing to him. She reached toward his shoe. He didn't move. She waited. 3 seconds. 4. 5. He shifted his weight just enough, not out of courtesy, but because his leg was getting stiff. She slid the resolution out from under his sole, a dark shoe print smeared across her printed name. She smoothed it flat with her palm, stacked everything neatly, tapped the edges against the table, put them back in her folder. Then she walked to the far end of the boardroom, 14 chairs away from his, sat down, opened her folder again, and wrote one word on the top of her notepad. Witness. Calloway watched her from across the room. He poured himself a fresh cup of coffee, sat in his chair, the big one, the head of the table, the throne. He leaned back, crossed one leg over the other, smiled the smile of a man who believed he had just put the world back in its proper order. Smart girl. You learn fast. Now sit there quietly until somebody comes to collect you, like the lost package you are. He pulled out his phone, started scrolling through emails he still wasn't reading, completely relaxed, completely satisfied with himself, completely unaware that the security camera in the northeast corner of the ceiling, the one he'd personally approved the installation of in 2022,
had captured every word, every gesture, every crumpled page. And that 4 people standing in the hallway outside had just watched Margaret Whitfield's text light up their phones with 5 words. Do not intervene. Grace's orders. They were shaking. But they waited, because Grace had already told them to. 8:42 a.m. Calloway was settled into his chair like a king on a throne, coffee in one hand, phone in the other, legs crossed. That smug, satisfied grin still plastered across his face like he'd just won a fight that was never even close. Grace sat 14 chairs away, silent, still. Her folder reopened, her pen in hand, writing something he couldn't see and didn't care about. The boardroom smelled like fresh coffee and furniture polish. The morning sun had shifted, throwing long golden rectangles across the marble table. Outside the windows, Manhattan stretched out in every direction, steel and glass and ambition as far as the eye could see. Inside, the only sound was the soft scratch of Grace's pen on paper and the occasional tap of Calloway's thumb on his phone screen. He glanced up at her, shook his head slowly, muttered under his breath, just loud enough for her to hear. Unbelievable. Absolutely unbelievable. 22 years I've been running this company, and this is what they send up to my floor? This is what passes for professional now? Grace didn't look up. She kept writing. That made it worse. Because Harold Calloway was not a man who tolerated being ignored. Not by his board, not by his executives, and certainly not by a young black woman he'd already mentally categorized as furniture. He stood up, walked around the table, slowly. His footsteps echoed in the empty room. He stopped right beside Grace's chair, towered over her. His shadow swallowed her notepad whole. Let me see your bag. Grace looked up. Excuse me? Your bag, that thing on the floor next to your chair. I want to see what you brought into my building. For all I know, you walked off with company property on your way up here. Sir, I can assure you, I'm not asking for your assurance, sweetheart. I'm telling you to open the damn bag. He didn't wait for her to respond. He bent down, grabbed her leather tote by the handles, and flipped it upside down over the conference table. Everything inside tumbled out and clattered across the polished marble surface like evidence at a crime scene. A wallet, worn brown leather stuffed with receipts. A leather portfolio with the Belmont Partners logo embossed in silver on the cover. He didn't notice. A bottle of water, which rolled across the table and nearly fell off the edge before stopping against the stack of napkins. A pen engraved with Wharton MBA, Class of 2022. He didn't notice that either. A small framed photograph. Grace, at 5 years old, sitting on her mother's lap in front of a tiny Christmas tree in their Baltimore apartment. The frame was cheap plastic, the kind you buy at a dollar store, the kind that means everything to the person who carries it and nothing to anyone else. And a Bible, small, leather-bound, the cover cracked and faded from years of being held, carried, opened, read, and loved. On the inside cover, in shaky handwriting that belonged to an old woman with arthritic fingers, to Gracie, from Grandma Ruth, 1998. Remember the people they don't see. Calloway picked up the Bible first, held it between his thumb and index finger, like he was picking up a dead insect. He turned it over, flipped through a few pages with the tip of his pinky, barely touching it, like it might contaminate him. Oh, this is precious. Still carrying one of these around? What, you think this is going to protect you? He tossed it back onto the table. It skidded across the marble surface, slid past 3 chairs, and fell off the edge onto the floor. The cracked leather cover hit the cold marble with a soft, horrible sound. The sound of something sacred landing somewhere it was never meant to land. A long scratch appeared across the cover, right through the faded gold lettering that once spelled Holy Bible. Grace stared at her grandmother's book, lying face down on the floor. For the first time all morning, something shifted behind her eyes. Not tears, not anger, something deeper. Something that settled into her bones, like a decision being made in real time. She did not pick it up. Not yet. Then he grabbed the photograph, held it up to the light, squinted at it. "Who's this? Your mama? Cute little apartment. Looks about right." He set it face down on the table, dismissively, like closing a book he'd never bothered to read. "All right, no stolen property. Just a bunch of sentimental garbage. You people always carry your whole life story in your purse like somebody's going to ask." Grace said nothing. She reached down slowly, picked up her grandmother's Bible from the cold marble floor, wiped the dust off the cover with the sleeve of her blazer, gently, carefully, the way you'd clean a wound on someone you love. She ran her thumb over the new scratch across the gold lettering. Then she placed it back in her bag, quietly, reverently. Calloway pulled out his phone, hit a contact. Vanessa. He pressed speakerphone, deliberately, performatively, and held the phone out in front of him so the sound would fill the entire boardroom. It rang twice. "Harold, I'm in the middle of yoga class." "Babe, you will not believe what's sitting in my boardroom right now." "Harold, I told you not to call during..." There is a young black woman, probably 25, maybe younger, sitting at my conference table, claiming she was invited to my 9 a.m. board meeting. I think DEI finally rotted straight through HR's brain. They're sending people in off the street now. Literally off the street, Vanessa. She had a Bible in her purse and a photo of her mama's living room. I'm not making this up. Vanessa paused. 2 seconds. 3. "Harold, don't say things like that at work. Please. We'll talk when you get home." She hung up. Calloway shrugged, looked at Grace, grinned. My wife. Liberal heart. She'll come around. Then he picked up the desk phone, dialed security. The speakerphone crackled to life again. "Security desk, Hawthorne speaking. Daniel, I've got a trespasser in the executive boardroom. Black female, mid-20s, no badge, no ID, won't leave. I need her removed immediately. And I want the lobby cameras pulled to find out how she got past the front desk." A pause on the line, long enough to feel strange. The faint sound of Hawthorne breathing. Then, carefully, "Sir, can you confirm her name?" "She says her name is Grace Irwin. Probably made it up." Another pause. Longer this time. Then, "I'll be right up, sir." The line went dead. Calloway didn't notice the change in Hawthorne's voice. He was too busy feeling victorious. He walked back to Grace's end of the table, leaned down, both palms flat on the marble surface, his face 18 inches from hers, his coffee breath hot against her skin. "Let me give you a life lesson for free, sweetheart, because clearly nobody else has had the decency to explain how the world actually works." His voice dropped low, almost a whisper, but the kind of whisper designed to be heard by everyone. People like me built this country. Every building you've ever walked past, every road you've ever driven on, every dollar in your little worn-out wallet. That's because of people like me. And people like you? You exist in these spaces because people like me allow it. Remember that. He straightened up. Then he did something that made every person watching the security feed later feel physically sick. He reached down and tapped her shoulder with 2 fingers. Twice. Tap, tap. Like patting a dog that just learned to sit. "Good girl. Now stay." Then he walked back to his throne, sat down, picked up his phone, started scrolling through golf scores. 8:54 a.m. 6 minutes until the meeting. Board members began arriving. Gerald Wilson walked in first, then Theodore Brown, then Linda Davis, the youngest board member, the only black woman on the board besides Grace. Each one walked in. Each one saw Grace sitting at the far end. Each one recognized her from the confidential profile photos the board had been circulating for 6 weeks. Margaret Whitfield caught Gerald Wilson's arm as he sat down, whispered, "Say nothing. Grace wants it this way." Walter Anderson, 71, the firm's most senior partner, walked in last. He took one look at the scene. Calloway smirking at the head, Grace silent at the far end, papers slightly wrinkled from being thrown and restacked, and understood everything in 4 seconds. He sat down, opened his leather notebook, and began writing. Every word Calloway had said, every detail he could see. Not because anyone asked him to, but because 40 years of practicing law had taught him one thing. When you see someone building a case against themselves, you take notes. Linda Davis lasted 90 seconds. She stood up, mumbled something about needing water, walked into the hallway, pressed her back against the wall, covered her mouth with both hands, and cried. Silently. Because she'd been the Grace in other rooms before, and nobody had ever come to save her either. Inside the boardroom, Calloway addressed the arrivals with his arms spread wide, like a host welcoming guests to a dinner party. Folks, sorry about the little disruption. Some kind of mix-up downstairs. We're handling it. Security's on the way to clean this up. He gestured toward Grace without looking at her, like she was a spill someone hadn't mopped yet. Margaret Whitfield's phone buzzed. A text from Chairman Morton. I'm in the elevator. 2 minutes. She looked at Grace. Grace looked back, and gave her the smallest nod in the world. Almost. 8:59 a.m. The boardroom doors opened. Not slowly. Not gently. They opened the way doors open when the person behind them has already made every decision that matters and is simply arriving to deliver the verdict. Chairman Philip Morton, 64 years old, white-haired, tall, a face carved from decades of boardrooms and bad news and billion-dollar decisions. He wore a navy suit with no tie. His shoes made no sound on the marble. Behind him, Daniel Hawthorne, head of building security, holding a tablet against his chest like a shield. Behind Hawthorne, 2 uniformed security officers, hands clasped in front of them, faces blank. Calloway saw Morton and exhaled with relief. Like a man who'd been holding his breath underwater and just broke the surface. Phil, thank God. We've got a situation here. Some girl walked in off the street and... Sit down, Harold. What? I said sit down. Morton's voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was the kind of voice that moved furniture without touching it. Calloway sat. Not because he wanted to, because his legs made the decision before his brain could argue. Morton walked to the head of the table. He didn't look at Calloway. He looked at the room. Every face. Every pair of eyes. Then he spoke. Before we begin our scheduled agenda, I need to formally introduce someone most of you have already been briefed on in our private sessions over the past 6 weeks. He turned toward Grace, extended his hand toward the far end of the table, toward the young woman sitting 14 chairs away in the seat she'd been banished to. This is Grace Irwin, MBA from the Wharton School of Business, former director at Belmont Partners, where she transformed a division losing $40 million a year into a $120 million revenue engine in under 24 months. Last month, this board voted unanimously, every single member, to appoint her as the new Chief Executive Officer of Orion Dynamics, effective today. Silence. Not the comfortable kind, the kind that crushes things. Calloway's smile didn't disappear. It died. It collapsed inward like a building imploding in slow motion. First the corners of his mouth, then his jaw went slack. Then the color drained from his face. Not slowly, not gradually, but all at once, like someone had pulled a plug somewhere behind his eyes and everything just emptied out. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. Phil, that's a joke, right? Tell me that's a joke. Morton didn't smile. Margaret Whitfield didn't smile. Walter Anderson didn't smile. Nobody smiled. Phil? Nothing. Margaret stood up, walked around the table carrying a thin folder. She set it down in front of Calloway and opened it. 3 documents, laid out side by side like evidence at a trial. The first, the board resolution appointing Grace Irwin as CEO, dated 6 weeks ago, with 8 signatures at the bottom, including one that Calloway stared at for 5 full seconds before recognizing it as his own. He'd signed it without reading it, like he signed everything, because he'd never imagined the board would make a move this big without telling him first. The second, an email from Calloway's own account, sent 3 weeks ago, forwarding a meeting invitation to Grace Irwin for the Executive Leadership Transition, 9 a.m. His assistant had sent it on his behalf. He'd never opened it. never read the recipient's name. The third, Grace's full personnel profile, her photograph, her credentials, her appointment letter. This document had been circulated to every board member 5 weeks ago. The email sat unopened in Calloway's inbox, unread, like everything else he considered beneath his attention. Margaret looked at him with something that wasn't quite pity and wasn't quite contempt. It was closer to exhaustion. You signed all of this, Harold. Every page. You just never read any of it. Grace stood up, slowly. The sound of her chair pushing back from the table cut through the silence like a blade through paper. She walked toward the head of the table. 14 chairs. Each step measured. Each step silent on the marble floor. Every eye in the room followed her. Board members, security officers, Hawthorne with his tablet, Morton with his hands clasped behind his back. She stopped next to Calloway's chair. He was still sitting in it, still gripping the armrests. His knuckles had gone white. A thin line of sweat had appeared along his hairline. For the first time that morning, Harold Calloway had to look up at her. Grace, This is a terrible misunderstanding. I didn't... Stand up, Mr. Calloway. He didn't move. Stand up. He stood. His legs were unsteady. His hands were trembling. Not from fear exactly, but from the sudden, violent collision between who he thought he was 5 minutes ago and who he was discovering he actually was. Grace reached into her jacket pocket, pulled out the crumpled $100 bill he'd thrown at her earlier. She held it up between 2 fingers so the entire room could see it. You told me to take this and buy myself breakfast. You said it was more than my day rate. She stepped forward, tucked the bill into his breast pocket, patted it once, gently, the way you'd pat a child who just learned a hard lesson. You can buy your own breakfast now, Mr. Calloway, because as of this moment, your company credit cards, your car service, your expense account, and your access to every system in this building are revoked. She pulled out her chair. His chair. The throne. And she sat down in it. The leather creaked softly under her weight. The morning sun caught the gold initials on her folder. G.I. And for one brief second they glowed. Now, let's talk about what happened in this room this morning. Grace opened her folder. The same folder Calloway had thrown across the table 24 minutes ago. Pages wrinkled, one corner bent. A shoe print still smudged across the board resolution with her name on it. She smoothed the first page flat, looked up at him, directly. Mr. Calloway, I arrived at this building at 7:48 this morning. No badge, no title, no introduction. Do you know why? He said nothing. His mouth was open, but nothing came out, like a fish pulled from water. Because Chairman Morton asked me what kind of company I was inheriting. And I told him, the only way to know is to walk in as nobody. To see how it treats people when there's nothing to gain from being decent. She paused. Then she began. You called me sweetheart 4 times. You told me I was high, asked what I smoked. You called me black-sworded twice. You called me a stray. You ripped my report and threw it in the trash. You threw my entire folder across this table. You stepped on a board resolution with my name on it. You dumped my personal belongings across this conference table. You threw my dead grandmother's Bible on the floor. You called your wife on speakerphone and said DEI had rotted through HR's brain. You tapped my shoulder like a dog and said, "Good girl, now stay." The room was so quiet you could hear the air conditioning cycling through vents 60 feet above. Every one of those things was recorded by the security system you personally signed off on in 2022. I read that contract last week. I suspect you never did. Calloway's voice came out cracked. Grace, Miss Irwin, I didn't know. If I had known who you were... Stop. The word hit the room like a gunshot. That is the problem. You said, if I had known who you were, which means everything you did this morning, every insult, every slur, you would do to any black woman who walked in without a title. As long as she was nobody, it was fine. She pulled her grandmother's Bible from her bag, set it on the table gently. The scratch across the cover caught the morning light. My grandmother, Ruth Irwin, cleaned offices in Manhattan for 36 years. She scrubbed toilets in boardrooms like this one. She gave me this Bible the day I got into Wharton. 3 months later, she passed away. Her voice didn't waver. She said one thing to me every night. Remember the people they don't see. I've carried those words into every room I've walked into, including this one. She looked at him one last time. I'll remember you, Mr. Calloway, but not for the reasons you hoped. She turned to Hawthorne. Daniel, please escort Mr. Calloway to collect his personal items. Personal only. Then off the premises. All access revoked immediately. Hawthorne stepped forward, face steady, eyes telling a different story. 9 years of waiting for this moment. Mr. Calloway, please come with me. Calloway grabbed his arm, desperate. Daniel, you've known me 9 years. That wasn't me. I was having a bad morning. Just tell her. Hawthorne looked at him, quiet. In 9 years, today is the second time you've used my first name. The first was 28 minutes ago when you called me to drag your new CEO out of her own boardroom. I won't be delivering messages. The elevator doors opened. Calloway stepped in. The doors closed on his face, pale, slack, already aging. Upstairs, Grace sat in her chair, the big one, head of the table. She picked up her phone. Mama, I got the chair. Denise Irwin's voice cracked with 26 years of prayers answered at once. Of course you did, baby. Of course you did. The story should have ended there. A man humiliates a stranger. The stranger turns out to be his boss. He gets walked out. Justice served. Credits roll. But real justice doesn't work like that. Real justice is slow. It's heavy. It builds. And for Harold Calloway, that Tuesday morning was just the first domino. By 11:30 a.m., Orion Dynamics issued an internal memo. Harold Calloway had stepped down, effective immediately. Grace Irwin was the new CEO. The memo was 3 paragraphs long. Professional, bloodless. The kind of corporate language designed to say everything while revealing nothing. By 1 p.m., the press release hit Reuters, then Bloomberg, then every financial news desk in Manhattan. The headlines were polite. Orion Dynamics announces leadership transition, because nobody outside the building knew what had actually happened yet. That changed 6 weeks later. Linda Davis couldn't sleep. Every night since that Tuesday, she'd been lying in bed staring at the ceiling of her Brooklyn apartment, replaying the same 28 minutes in her head. The sound of Grace's Bible hitting the marble floor. The look on Calloway's face when he said, "Good girl, now stay." The feeling of her own back pressed against the hallway wall, her hands over her mouth, crying silently because she'd been the Grace in other rooms, and nobody had ever come. So she started making phone calls. Quietly, carefully, one former employee at a time. Women who had left Orion Dynamics over the past decade. Women who had been pushed out, passed over, silenced, or paid to disappear. She didn't ask leading questions. She didn't promise anything. She just asked one thing. What happened to you? They told her. 6 weeks of phone calls, 11 women, 11 stories that sounded so similar they could have been written by the same author. Linda walked into Grace's office on a Wednesday morning. She set a folder on the desk. Inside, 11 names, 11 statements, 11 women who had encountered the same Harold Calloway that Grace met on that Tuesday. Except, nobody had been there to see it. No cameras, no board members in the hallway, no chairman arriving in the elevator to change the ending. Grace opened the folder, read the first name, Patricia Williams, hired in 2016, promoted twice, filed an internal complaint about a racist remark Calloway made during a leadership retreat in 2018, passed over for the VP role she'd been promised, forced out in 2019 after refusing Calloway's repeated unwanted advances, signed an NDA, took a $250,000 settlement, disappeared. Grace closed the folder. Does Patricia want to talk? She's been waiting 3 years for someone to ask. Then we ask, and we give her the choice. Silence with compensation, or truth with support. Her decision, not ours. Patricia chose truth. The lawsuit was filed 4 months after that Tuesday. Patricia Williams versus Harold Calloway and Orion Dynamics. $40 million in damages. Wrongful termination, harassment, retaliation. The NDA was challenged on grounds of material change in circumstance. New evidence had surfaced that the company had actively concealed the scope of Calloway's behavior. The trial began 6 months later. A federal courtroom in Lower Manhattan. Wood-paneled walls, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. The smell of old paper and recycled air. The jury was 8 people. 4 women, 4 men. 3 black, 2 Latino, 3 white. They sat in 2 rows of 4 and watched the boardroom footage on a screen mounted to the wall. They watched Calloway call Grace a stray. They watched him rip her report and throw it in the trash. They watched him dump her bag across the conference table. They watched him pick up a dead woman's Bible with 2 fingers like it was contaminated. They watched it slide off the table and hit the floor. They watched him tap her shoulder. Twice. Good girl. Now stay. They watched Grace kneel on the cold marble floor and pick up her own papers while he poured himself fresh coffee and smiled. The footage lasted 23 minutes. When it ended, the courtroom was silent for 11 seconds. A woman in the front row of the jury, mid-30s, dark hair, business suit, pressed her hand against her mouth. A man in the back row, older, gray-haired, closed his eyes and kept them closed for a long time. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. They awarded Patricia Williams $26 million. The judge's ruling was 3 pages long. She read it in a flat, measured voice. No drama, no speeches, just law. But at the very end, she looked up from the document, removed her reading glasses, looked directly at Harold Calloway, sitting at the defense table in a suit that no longer fit him the way it used to. 1 sentence. Mr. Calloway, the court has reviewed the recording. I have nothing to add to what it shows. Then she put her glasses back on and moved to the next case. After the verdict, everything else fell like dominoes in a row. The EEOC opened a federal investigation. Calloway agreed to a settlement, a permanent ban from serving as a corporate officer for 10 years, and a $4.5 million personal fine. His country club, the one he'd belonged to for 25 years, didn't just revoke his membership. They published the notice in the local newspaper. 3 paragraphs. His full name. The reason. Vanessa Calloway filed for divorce the same night she heard the speakerphone recording played back in court. She didn't call Harold's lawyer. She called her own, the civil rights attorney she'd kept in touch with for 30 years, from her old life, the life before she'd started making excuses for the man she married. When Harold came home that evening, his suitcase was packed and waiting by the front door. The locks had already been changed. And then there was Sarah. Sarah Calloway, 29, Harold's only daughter. She sat in the back row of the courtroom every day of the trial. She didn't speak to reporters. She didn't speak to her father. She just watched. 3 weeks after the verdict, she filed paperwork to legally change her last name to her mother's maiden name. She told one journalist, only one, why. That recording wasn't a bad morning. That was my father without an audience he respected. I spent 29 years making excuses for who he was. I'm done. 18 months after that Tuesday morning, Grace received a plain white envelope at her office. No return address. Inside, a photograph. Old, faded at the edges. A little girl, about 8 years old, standing next to a black woman in a maid's uniform, both smiling. The woman's hand resting on the girl's shoulder, gentle, warm. Grace turned it over. On the back, in careful handwriting, "This is Dorothy. She raised me from the time I was 3 until my father fired her when I was 12. She asked for a raise. He told her to leave. I found her last month. I apologized. I wanted you to know. Sarah." Grace set the photograph down on her desk. She looked at it for a long time, at Dorothy's smile, at the little girl who didn't yet know what her father was. And for the first time since that Tuesday morning, for the first time in this entire story, Grace Irwin cried. Not for herself, not for Calloway, for Dorothy, for her grandmother Ruth, for every woman who cleaned a boardroom and was never seen. 2 years later, the boardroom on the 52nd floor of Orion Dynamics looks different now. The cold marble table is still there. The floor-to-ceiling windows still frame the Manhattan skyline. But the room has a new name. A small, brushed steel plaque on the door reads, "The Listening Room." Every new executive hired at Orion Dynamics spends their first morning in this room, alone, with a tablet. They watch 23 minutes of unedited security footage from a Tuesday morning 2 years ago. No commentary, no context, just the footage. They watch a man call a woman a stray. They watch him throw her papers. They watch him dump her bag. They watch him pick up a Bible and toss it on the floor. They watch him tap her shoulder and say, "Good girl, now stay." Then they watch her kneel down and pick up her own papers while he poured himself coffee. Nobody has ever watched that footage and come out the same person. On the wall of the executive corridor, there's a new row of portraits. Grace Irwin's photograph hangs at the top. Below her, 8 other leaders, 5 women, 4 people of color, 1 veteran with a service dog sitting at his feet. Below the photographs, in brushed steel lettering, 1 line: "Remember the people they don't see." Under Grace's leadership, Orion Dynamics has changed. Stock price up 34% in 18 months. Voluntary employee turnover down 41%. 3 new vice presidents promoted from within, including Jonathan Williams, a black engineer Calloway had passed over 4 times in 6 years. Patricia Williams, the woman who won the $26 million verdict, accepted Grace's offer to return to Orion as Director of Diversity and Inclusion. Her office is on the 52nd floor. It used to be Calloway's corner office. The mahogany desk is gone. The bourbon is gone. The wall of awards is gone. In their place, a round table with 6 chairs, a whiteboard, and a framed photograph of Patricia's mother, who cleaned hotel rooms in Newark for 31 years. Daniel Hawthorne was promoted to Vice President of Security and Ethics. His salary doubled. The first policy he wrote required that every security officer in the building learn the name of every employee on their floor. First and last. No exceptions. Caleb, the 24-year-old assistant who stood in the corner of the boardroom that morning, watching everything, saying nothing because Grace told him not to, is now her chief of staff. Grace hired him the day after the transition. She asked him one question. "You saw everything that morning. You didn't intervene. Why?" "Because you told me not to." "And if I hadn't told you, what would you have done?" "I would have picked up the Bible." Grace smiled. "That's why you're getting promoted." And on the wall of the listening room, behind a simple glass frame, hangs a single $100 bill. Crisp. Unspent. Below it, a small brass plate with an engraving. On this date, a man gave this $100, expecting it would buy his way out of accountability. It cost him $30 million instead. G.I. Harold Calloway lives in a smaller house now. Connecticut. Quiet street. Divorced. His children are polite, but distant. He tried to write a book about lessons learned. No publisher touched it. He plays golf alone most Wednesdays at a public course 40 minutes from the club that published his expulsion in the newspaper. He is not a monster. He is something worse. He is ordinary. He is the version of power that never gets checked until it's too late. He is the man who was kind to people who could help him and cruel to people who couldn't. And he is everywhere. Grace still walks into the listening room some mornings, before anyone else arrives. She sits in the chair Calloway threw her out of. She opens her laptop. Sometimes she plays the footage, watches herself kneel on the marble floor, watches her own hands picking up papers one page at a time. Then she closes the laptop, touches the cracked leather cover of her grandmother's Bible, and gets back to work. So here's my question for you, and I want you to really sit with this one. Have you ever been in a room where someone treated you like you didn't matter, only to find out they had no idea who they were talking to? Or, and this is the harder question, have you ever been the one doing the dismissing before you knew who somebody really was? Drop your story in the comments. I read every single one. And if Grace's story hit you the way it hit me, share this with someone who needs to hear it. Like, subscribe, and remember one thing before you go. The way you treat someone when you think they're nobody, that says everything about who you really are. See you in the next one.